by saying welcome to everyone. Really pleased to be hosting this climate change conference this afternoon with a focus on energy. And as you will well know, it coincides with COP26 and the range of debates that are currently going on in Glasgow. But for us, most importantly, at a local level, we want to discuss how we can work together to mobilise our community to respond to the actions we need to take here in Merton to reach the net zero emission targets. With a focus on fuel poverty and energy today, we want to include steps we can take to minimise our use of fossil fuels and move to more sustainable energy sources. So that's my slide. If we move on to the next slide, yeah. So every day and currently we are seeing in the media reports of catastrophic events. There's a lot of coverage right now, isn't there, on this, on the TV, floods, heat waves, countries where access to water is becoming more difficult. And in actual fact, today I've seen a report about Madagascar, which they're saying, you know, has this huge access to food poverty issue purely due to climate change. And all in all, I'm sure you agree, it is a very depressing picture. We know that social justice is a key part of climate change and that so many of our poorer populations suffer because of the actions by the wealthier nations, and that really has to change. We also know it is the pledges, decisions, and most importantly, the implementation of those pledges by world leaders that will make the difference. So what we've done during COP26 is have our own campaign, and we have a number of asks. And at a national level, obviously our influence as a smaller local charity is not high at a national level, but we can here in the UK lobby for change, and COP26 provides that opportunity through marches, debates and campaigns. Here at Sustainable Merton, we work in partnership with organisations such as Friends of the Earth to voice our view that is now the time for the rhetoric and greenwashing to stop and for action to start. As the Prime Minister has said earlier this week, we are at 1 minute to midnight and the clock is ticking. The government has announced its net zero strategy, and I am pleased to say that some of our national asks are included in that, and that the Chancellor has made reference to a number in his spending review last week as well. And indeed, I think there is a large debate around fossil fuels and green finance and all of that today. But the speed and the scale of these strategies and initiatives are fundamental, and they're quite frankly not enough action. So there we come on to our local asks. Now here in Merton, as a local charity, we believe change can be made and implemented, and we have a number of asks that we are campaigning for. And here they are on the slide here and the next slide coming up. I'm sure that they resonate with you, and I'm sure we will talk about them when we get to the second half of this webinar. Firstly, as you can see here, there's a range there. They cover all the areas around air quality, active travel, energy, waste, health and well-being, and the like. So I'm sure none of those come as a surprise to you. Firstly, before we get on to listening to our speakers and then our discussions, I wanted to share with you how Sustainable Merton is reaching out to the community here in Merton to drive understanding, awareness and behaviour change. So if we can go to the next slide. These are the actions that we are taking, and I'd like at this point to introduce you to a couple of my colleagues, Rachel Edwards and then Eleanor Smallshaw, who will expand on how we are working with residents and businesses. So over to you, Rachel, first.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, so at Sustainable Merton, we're all about addressing the climate emergency through grassroots action. And our mission is to mobilize Merton community to respond to the climate emergency and empower people to contribute to an improved quality of life without compromising our planet. We're all about this practical action. And we organize a really wide range of projects and initiatives, including a community fridge network, community gardens, monitoring air quality, litter picking, and upcycling workshops. All of these projects pair environmental goals with social goals. And through this work, we connect and enable people to make sustainable behavior changes, wherever they are on their sustainable journey. And our volunteers, or as we call them, community champions, are leaders in this regard, and we connect them to opportunities to help people along this behavior change journey. And finally, at the core of what we do is partnership working. Together, we really are stronger, and we can all maximize our impact through sharing our knowledge and resources. And that's really why we've organized this session today, to learn from each other through the panelists and through the discussion that we'll have later. So I mentioned our community champions, and this is a 200-strong group of really passionate volunteers from a diverse range of backgrounds and perspectives who are really championing behavior change in the local community. And one of the really unique aspects about this program is that people can tailor their involvement to their own interests and their own availability and schedule, picking which projects are best for them to be involved with. And despite the pandemic, we saw a continuous growth of champions throughout the last 2 years. And we're just so grateful to all of them for all of their work, because really they're at the heart of what we do, and we wouldn't be able to carry out all our projects without their involvement. And I'm now going to pass it on to my colleague, Eleanor Smallshaw, who is our projects and campaigns coordinator.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So in addition to the work we do with residents, we also work with businesses too. So in 2020, we set up Merton's Business Network for Climate Action. This is a joint venture with Sustainable Merton and Merton Chamber of Commerce, and kindly sponsored throughout the last couple of years by Centre Court Shopping Centre. The network supports local businesses in their journey to becoming more sustainable through networking, sharing resources, and celebrating the good work they do. The businesses that join our network, we call them business champions, and we really encourage other businesses who are interested in becoming more sustainable and future-proofing their businesses to get in touch with us and sort of join in with this network. So if anyone is listening and is interested, my email is sort of on my name, but I'll also put it in the chat function. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. And that's just a little bit about what Sustainable Merton does. As you say, as you've heard, we are very much about working in partnership to meet those very stretching net zero targets, and also really to really influence behaviour change. So if you would like to get involved or find out anything more about our range of activity on waste, energy, air quality and food includes our community fridge and our growing initiatives, please get in touch. Now we move on to the next section of our webinar, which is where I'm going to introduce 3 speakers to you. As I said at the beginning, the focus of this webinar is around energy in relation to climate change. And just a point of context is that 81% of the borough's greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy used to heat and power buildings in Merton. That's quite a stark statistic, isn't it? So we know there is much to do. So our 3 speakers, Toby, Anka and Robin, I will introduce one after the other, are going to talk about different perspectives and different things. So I hope it will be a very interesting discussion and stimulate our discussion later on as well. So firstly, I would like to introduce Toby Costin, who is the Director of Crew Energy. It's a not-for-profit community benefit society that supports the local community's transition to low carbon economy. Toby has 20 years experience in the energy sector and 8 years in renewable and community energy. He has also recently launched a new business, Lava Echo, that brings innovation to the domestic heating market, and we know the time is right for that. So welcome, Toby, and over to you.
Thanks, Diana. Afternoon, everybody. So I've been asked to give a speech on the experience Crew has had over the last few years of getting involved in community action. So I've got 3 slides here, so it won't be very long, but it would at least give you a picture of why we think community action is important, what barriers we've seen, and what are the benefits of local action. They're the 3 areas we're really looking at. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So why is it important? I think part of this is lack of leadership from central government. You know, there's been lots of news items, right? We've seen the Green Homes grant being pretty badly handled. There's probably been too much support for the gas industry for too long, and now we're seeing a little bit of too much support for hydrogen as well. So, and there isn't really a thought process. They know they've got to do stuff, but they haven't really thought it through. So I think, again, a lot of this then falls on us to look at things at a local level and see what we can be doing, because we're not getting leadership from central government we need. And I think if you look at local authorities, there's a couple of issues really. I think one is limited budgets mean that they don't have very big teams in this area. I was part of the original climate emergency working group, and we helped write the plan. I was helping write the buildings and energy component of that. And I think there were two people on that full time, and that's down to 1 at the moment. So, you know, it's tough. We get that. We know that there's been real cutbacks over the last 10 years of around about 30%. So there's not a lot of money either for projects. So again, another reason why we're going to have to look at ourselves. I think the second part of this is local authorities generally, and I've just picked out Merton's number because we're talking about Merton, is only 3% of the borough's emissions. So their 2030 targets are very focused across London and across the country, I'm sure, on hitting their own targets to try and get their 3% emissions or 5% emissions, where it might be, under control. The issue with that is that it feels a little bit that we're not getting started early enough on everything else. So the 97% in Merton's case, the 92% say in Wandsworth's case, the 2 boroughs that Crew are very active in, there's not enough activity going on, and therefore we think that community action is going to be really, really important in getting those targets. And sort of part of this, I think, is around technologies and helping people understand that it's not just about saving carbon. Actually, these things can save you money too. So there is an economic incentive in adopting some of these new technologies. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Could we jump to the next slide? Oh, sorry, 2 slides down. So for us, what have been the barriers to community action, really? I think probably a lack of support and promotion from local authorities. We haven't really got a huge amount of support from Merton so far. We're starting to get a little bit of support from Wandsworth now in terms of their comms team and their communities team, but not really from the properties teams, not really from the eco teams in either borough. And we would like more support, because we think we can help them, and they can certainly help promote the services that we're offering. Government has generally sort of pulled back from community groups, and I think a lot of that comes from the feed-in tariff being abused back in the sort of 2015 through 17, where big developers were setting themselves up as community groups to just get SEIS, EIS, and then all of those tax breaks were taken away, but then everything else was taken away from community energy. And I think government could look at that and look at maybe reinstating some of these tax breaks for truly community benefit societies, the companies that have the right structure, have the right incentives to be able to make it easier to invest in businesses like our own and projects like the ones that we might have. I think the other thing that we found really, really hard is the constant flux in government regulation. You know, we've had a 2-year window that got extended a little bit. for the most recent round of RHI. That's not really enough time for people to decide that they could build a business model, get people trained up, qualify for all the various things you have to do, like MCS accreditation. That's micro certification for delivery of projects on a domestic level. It's all very quite choppy, the government regulation so far, which makes it really, really difficult. So it was interesting to see that they extended the next plan for, say, heat pumps from 2 years to 3 years to give people a bit more of a runway to get involved in understand what heat pumps are, training up to be able to install them, and all those kind of things. But we need even longer timeframes than that, I think, for people to really, really step up to this. Otherwise, it just feels too much in flux constantly. I think that there's some good funding around now. You know, we get really good support from the GLA in the London Community Energy Fund. The local council funds are excellent. The CIL money that we see, so the Merton Neighbourhood Fund, Wandsworth Local Fund, for instance, across the border there. That there is a good amount, and I think CIL have done some estimates on this, and they estimate there could be up to 72 million of funding by 2022. From councils in London for community energy projects. So, you know, that there's a big chunk of cash. I think there's probably a lack of funding, though, for groups to set up and operate. So I'm doing some mentoring at the moment with a group in Croydon. And what they could have really done with is sort of 10, 15,000 to get started. And there doesn't seem to be enough of that funding around at the moment. So I think that's probably another area that needs to be addressed locally and nationally to give support to these groups. We're always looking for volunteers with, you know, accountancy backgrounds, web design, legal. There's a lot of typos in that. I'm really sorry. Social media experts, all those kind of areas where we need those kind of skill sets. And if you look at some things like accountants and lawyers, apparently, you know, around about 40% of the big four and the big six would love to do pro bono work. They just don't know how to find us. So again, you know, a bit of government policy introducing that process would be really, really helpful, and I think unlock a lot more projects. Third sector organisations who we typically deal with, and they can be often hard to reach, and they're hard to get decisions out of. So projects can often take quite a long while. And one of the things we've noticed with other groups, and actually in our very early days too, chasing one project at a time and then it falling by the wayside, you lose a lot of people, a lot of members who were involved. They lose heart and they go off and do something else. So it's really important, I think, to have multiple projects running, and maybe not just focused on third sector, but looking at other things. So residents, businesses who are more likely to make decisions faster, and you get more traction. Just the final slide, please. Thank you. So there's a long list here of benefits of local action, but there really are. I mean, it's really important, I think, that we can make a difference. And I think we can make a difference in a number of ways. One obvious thing is finance. So we get access to finance that others don't. So London Community Energy Fund, there's National Lottery community share offers. We've got all the CIL funding, Merton Neighbourhood Fund, Wandsworth Local Fund, Islington have these funds. Every borough is starting to develop these CIL funds now. So there's access that we can get to. And the good thing about when you, for a council, for instance, if they get a bid from a community energy group, they know that that bid is 100% based on reducing carbon. It's not going to be, okay, we need to refurb the scout camp, which includes a new kitchen. That's not really doing anything to reduce carbon, that's increasing carbon. So the good thing for the councils is if they see a bid from us, it is 100% action. So they should be incentivized to accept more bids from community groups that are focused on delivering carbon reduction. I think the other thing we're finding, and this has really been in the last year, and it's taken us a while to get there, is residents are beginning to trust us more than they probably do local councils, certainly central government, maybe to a degree also some of the bigger charities, because we feel local, that they've got to know us as people, and that experience has come from us running our energy cafes. We're helping people with fuel poverty bias, fuel switching, getting them assessed whether they're suitable for home surveys, which can then involve sort of more interventions into their homes. It could be, you know, just us giving webinars and giving advice on events similar to this. I think that's a really important area for us, and I think we can help people along in this process to zero carbon, be that residents, be that local businesses, be it the third sector as well. I think there's a lot that we can do there. The other thing is, if we look at it, community groups are real innovators. You know, we're doing some work on one of our projects where we're looking at time shifting for heat pumps through water storage rather through batteries, which is probably around about 10% of the cost of doing it by batteries. It's a much more efficient, cheaper way of doing it, and the paybacks will be a whole lot shorter. We see things like Bath and Western looking at thermostat controls to control the hot water on time of use. So they're looking at the advanced time of use tariffs. There's groups like HADA who are running rural EV schemes, and we know that the big EV schemes are all based in towns and cities, and rural gets left behind, but somehow they've made the economics work on a very small local level, which is brilliant to see. And there's dozens of examples of real innovation coming from this sector. So I think that's the other thing about communities and community energy, is just that desire to try things to make stuff work, really. Probably one of the most important things, and when you think about community energy and what we're trying to do, there is the sort of the three pillars of everything, which is the carbon and air quality aspects. There is the economic aspect. We've got to make these projects work financially, but we also have to have social impact. And for us, that social impact can be things like our energy advice, our education programs, our webinars. We have watch parties. So there's a whole range of things there that we're doing over and above a normal commercial business to include the community. And then I think what that leads to is greater community cohesion. And for us now, what we're looking at, because we're setting up a heat pump business, we've already got a carbon audit business, so we can come into people's homes, advise them on measures they can do in their own homes. What we're trying to do there is actually create skills and jobs for the next generation of work, really. So, and I think that's going to be really, really important as well. We know there's a huge skill shortage in this sector, and I think it's really important that we can find people locally to work on our projects. So there's a lot that local action can do and community energy can do, and hopefully I've got that across to you guys in this presentation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Toby. And I just say to people, if you would like to put questions in the chat, we will take questions to all the speakers after they've all spoken, but please put questions in the chat while they're in your head. And thank you to Toby for sharing with us your expertise on community energy, that technical knowledge, and the bottom-up community approach. We now move on to our next speaker, Anka Taku, who is a community champion with Sustainable Merton since January 2020. She's been part of our energy team and obviously following all the latest news, policies and initiatives related to energy. And she's one of the authors of the Sustainable Merton Energy Saving Handbook, which we are essentially launching today. So Anka works for the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which is an institute dedicated to changing how public value is imagined, practiced, and evaluated to tackle societal challenges. There's some big words in there, Anka. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Dana, for the introduction and for inviting me to be part of this event. As you've just mentioned, I have the pleasure today to talk to you about the Sustainable Merton's latest sustainability handbook, the Energy Saving Handbook. This was sort of soft launch in early October, and I'm very proud to say that I am part of the team that created it. So as part of the Sustainable Merton energy team and under Rachel's guidance, myself, together with my fellow community champions, Michael, David, Phil, and Cecily. I'm not sure if they're able to be here today, but we work together on creating this resource. So today I'll be telling you a bit more about what the Energy Saving Handbook is, what makes it unique, but also how we're planning to promote it, and hopefully gain some of your insights as to how we can make sure this reaches as many people as possible. So what is the Energy Saving Handbook? It's a guide that contains a wide range of actions which will help individuals reduce the amount of energy they use and also save money on their energy bills. It's a free resource. It can be easily accessed and downloaded from the Sustainable Merton website. And the handbook aims to inform and persuade individuals to save energy in their homes by providing them with a series of very practical solutions. They range from everyday behavioral changes to more significant investments in low carbon energy solutions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see from this slide, the handbook is split into several sections. The easy changes to make an impact section focuses on everyday changes, which can have a big impact on energy usage and bills. So for example, something as simple as draft-proofing doors and windows is an easy step to take and could save up to £25 per year on the heating bill. Moving on to the next section, small investments with big savings. This looks at small investments and adaptations which can both improve the home comfort and reduce energy consumption. So you can see a small example here, installing radiator panels. That's a very cheap and effective way to avoid losing heat through your home walls. The spend more, save more section looks at all the sort of bigger investments, such as installing heat pumps, for example, which can, at the beginning seem very daunting and complicated. So we try to break these down into sort of very clear definitions, manageable steps, and included information also about the financial and carbon emission savings that are associated with each action. And then the wider actions to make an impact section offers an insight into actions that go beyond the way we consume energy, but ways that can help still the transition to a more sustainable society. So the example I've chosen here is about ethical investments such as pensions and their potential to support the move to a low carbon economy. So you can learn a bit more about that. But there'll be plenty more examples such as these in the handbook. Next slide, thank you. In terms of what makes this handbook unique, having looked at and researched outputs from many other organizations, I'd say there are three key elements. Number one, it's accessible, it's accessibility. We made the decision early on to tailor the content of the handbook to a broad range of audiences that includes people with expertise in the field of low carbon energy, but also those who are at the beginning of their sustainability journey, or simply those who want to save money through saving energy. Secondly, it's local focus. The handbook was very much written with Merton residents in mind, and so we made sure to include references to local organizations such as CRU. Thirdly, but not lastly, it's creativity. I think it's fair to say that the content that we put together was very much brought to life by the bespoke artwork and layout designed by the incredibly talented Cecily, who created some brilliant illustrations, as you will have seen throughout these presentations, and you can see many more of them in the handbook. Thank you. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, the energy saving handbook was sort of softly launched formally launched today, but softly launched in early October through the Sustainable Merton newsletter. Also, the Sustainable Merton team have done a wonderful job of promoting it via all their social media channels. Our plan is to try and reach as many people as possible, but particularly those who struggle with fuel poverty and wouldn't necessarily have heard of Sustainable Merton. As a result, we've compiled a long list of amplifiers, which includes, Merton businesses, local government, housing associations, schools, just to name a few. However, we would be very keen to hear from you if you think there are any other specific organizations you think we should be getting in touch with. Also on Saturday, November the 6th, we are organizing the Energy Saver pop-up event at the Merton Civic Centre, where we will be providing residents with advice on saving energy and we'll also be distributing copies of the Energy Saving Handbook. We'll also be providing free energy saving products such as LEDs, radiator reflector panels, draft excluders. Okay, and last slide, please. Thank you. So climate change and COP26 can feel quite distant sometimes, from day-to-day reality. But in fact, individual action can contribute to the larger scale changes that are needed to solve the global climate emergency. Energy efficiency itself is very much an essential element of tackling the climate crisis. Chris Stark, the head of the Climate Change Committee, has recently acknowledged that in order to get to net zero by 2050, we have to be more efficient in our use of energy. And there is a huge shift required to make homes more energy efficient and less drafty. As Dana mentioned earlier, in Merton, around 81% of the borough's greenhouse gas emissions are made up of the energy used to heat and power buildings. So, given the scale of this challenge, in addition to individual actions, further support from local and national governments will be required to enable people to make these greener choices, but particularly those that require significant financial investments and sometimes unfamiliar technologies. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time, and we hope you enjoy reading the handbook.
Thank you, Anka, and I think everyone will agree Anka's a great example of the value that our community champions, who are all volunteers, bring to Sustainable Merton. And yes, please download the handbook. I can see we've had some requests for printed copies. We will look at how we can do that and distribute it more widely as well. So thank you for that. Right, our third speaker is Robin Charlesworth. Robin is a resident of Merton. He's also a commercial property surveyor, currently working as an estate manager for the National Trust, looking after Morden Hall Park and other properties in London. He has a degree in civil engineering and a lifetime's worth of DIY experience. He's done a number of home refurbs, but never built a house before. Well, here's the picture of the one that he has done. And he's going to tell us about the story behind achieving a carbon neutral house. Over to you, Robin.
Thank you. Okay, so this is my personal experience of building this house. But I think there are probably it's good to show sort of what an eco home or what a sustainable home looks like during the build, and sort of what it's like to live in. So that's me and my family and the house that we built. How do I make this work? Oh, there we go. So what we did is we bought a normal house in Collier's Wood, which had a very big garden. It backed onto the railway, which meant there was no overlooking at the back, and crucially it had a very big sort of outbuilding already on the site, which I think probably helped from a planning permission terms. So we tried to get, what we did is we got planning permission to build at the very back of the garden. So it was a normal house, that's our house on the left, and crucially we owned the whole space between the two houses, which meant we had space for off-street parking, but also security, storage, etc. This is the site as we were building it. So you can see it is a garden. There was a lot of mud, and we had to take everything from the back through the side of the house to the street to dispose of. It was very muddy. There's a lot of tracking back and forth, but the kids, I think they enjoyed it. So eventually we got a slab down, and you can probably sort of see there in the bottom left corner, that back fence is the railway. So it is very close to the railway, and obviously it does abut all the neighbours. We got a slab down, and from there, we started to build the house. We built it out of SIPS panels, which are structural insulated panels, and they are the panels that you can see being offloaded. That's what a SIPS panel is. The thing with SIPS is it gives you an incredibly good thermal envelope, which means there are, your house is essentially built from insulation. But what it also meant for here was that it was designed on the computer. The structure was made in Scotland. It all arrived on a lorry and was erected very quickly. So we offloaded it all. There was a lot of it, but probably within 4 or 5 days, it looked like that. So you can see probably from the bottom left one, you can see the roof. You can see that the whole roof. There's no break in the insulation. It is insulation boards butted together with timber, and the timber has a very, very good insulative properties. So your whole roof, your walls are all made of insulation. So what you are starting to build from the ground up is an incredibly well insulated property, which is going to lead on to you needing less energy to run it. From there, we started fitting it out. We had a very heavy set of triple glazed airtight doors delivered. And the bottom left, you can see the green is ventilation system. The blue is air tightness tape to make sure even at structural level, we were dealing with the air tightness. And the top left is just more insulation going on the roof to form the slopes of the roof. These pictures sort of show top left, we just every detail. So even we didn't use copper pipe, we used special pre-insulated pipe work for the water. You can see the bottom left, there's more air tightness tape going in everywhere. And also because we had a dropped ceiling to accommodate the services, we put more insulation in the ceiling. And that's just a picture of me moving the doors. And that's what we ended up with. A nice house that we like to live in, but also has all these great features. Probably my favorite of all, which is that roof. So these are a few pictures of it. The bottom left, that's the garage that was. You walk through the garage, you go down a little path down the side, which is the top left, and then you come to the garden. And inside we've got a nice big living area with a big skylight. Just a few pictures of it. You go through that door on the right-hand picture into the sort of bedroom space at the back, where I've got 3 bedrooms, 2 little bathrooms. So the house is great, but what makes it eco? So there's loads of features here. I mean, that's a picture of the roof with the solar sort of set amongst it, but it's got triple glazing. It's got super insulation. It runs off a heat pump, which is it's only 4 kilowatts. We've got a solar array of 3.2 kilowatts. We've got an electric charging point, a wildflower roof, a ventilation system. And this is what some of that looks like. So that's the bottom left, that's a heat pump, if you've ever seen a heat pump. And on the right, that's the sort of cupboard with the ventilation system, a sprinkler system, the heating, and all the other controls in there. But really, I think that what I would like to get across, more than the technology, more than all the kit that has gone into it, is actually what makes it what makes an eco home, in my opinion, is the fact that it's a low energy home. And I think the real key to that is 2 simple things. It's insulation and it's air tightness. It was as much insulation as we could get in the roof. It was more insulation on top, it was more insulation underneath, and then it was making sure that at structural level and every level, we were making sure there was no air leakage. So we don't have things like a letterbox, a cat flap, we don't have extractor fans, the windows, the doors, they're all air tightness rated to make sure that that the heat loss is completely minimized. So by here, heat loss, what heat loss? So, I mean, today, this is a graph that I pulled together from the other week, but actually it's exactly the same today. So I'm sure probably everybody on this call has had their heating on today, but we haven't had to have our heating on since about March, because you go to bed and it's 23 degrees in the house and there is very little heat loss throughout the course of the night, even though it is obviously very cold. And I think I woke up this morning, I checked the temperature in the living room and it's about 21 degrees. And I can monitor that on my phone. It's steadily increased by about a degree or so throughout the day, just through solar gain, through a bit of cooking, people being around. So they really are, comfortable, lovely places to live. So the house is certified carbon neutral. So I just saw someone pop up and say, is it passive house? So it's not passive house. But it is carbon neutral. And what that means is that we generate more energy through our solar array than we use for those 3 things, for heating, hot water, and ventilation. So obviously any home could become carbon neutral if you could put enough, solar panels on the roof. But the problem is, if you've got a gas boiler, you might have a 3-bed house with a 30 kilowatt gas boiler. That's 30 kilowatts an hour. And, for 9 solar panels, you can only generate 3 kilowatts in that hour. So it'd be very, very difficult to do for anybody who hasn't got a low energy home. And it is a very difficult standard to hit. So I don't specifically monitor those 3 bits of energy use, but I do monitor my total energy use through my bills, and obviously my energy production. And what we've found is that during the summer, we are generating sort of 70% more energy throughout the course of the day than we are using. But then obviously in the winter, there's not as much sun, or the sun's at the wrong angle, and actually your solar doesn't generate anywhere near enough energy, particularly in sort of January, February, in which case you then need to pull from the grid. But overall, throughout the course of 12 months, I think we would generate approximately 85% of the total amount of energy that we will use as a home. I think the things that I've really learned from here is that it's the way to make an home that is comfortable to live in, that doesn't have big variations in temperature, that requires very little effort, little energy, little cost to heat. So if I take our bills, for example, including the MCS grant that Toby mentioned before, which is the grant we get for the heat pump, which is about £350 a year, I think our total energy bills will be about 150 quid for the year. So I think that designing it in from the outset into new buildings, having energy as your low energy, as your number one sort of priority, is really, really key. And I think the outcome, once it's built, when you live in it, you really can tell that it isn't just a normal home. And that's the end.
Thank you, Robin. There are a number of other questions in the chat as well, which we can come on to, or you could reply direct. What an amazing story, and something for everyone to aspire to, I think. And I think just a wonderful illustration about how we can live side by side, but actually using £150 worth of energy a year rather than a month is a massive, massive saving for the planet. So thank you for that. Good. Now we move on then to the question and answer and what I call thought leadership discussion. So this is your opportunity to put forward your questions, your views. You can see who is in the room with us. There's 45 of us in the room. If you click on the participants button, you will see the names of everyone there. We have from the London Borough of Merton both councillors and officers in the room. I think, I haven't checked, but we certainly, Councillor Natasha Irons as the Cabinet Lead for the Local Environment and Green Spaces is here, and Councillor Martin Welton as Cabinet Lead for Housing, Regeneration and the Climate Emergency, I think is here, but that's me, I haven't checked who is online. So there are other local councillors. We've got lots of residents here. We've got people representing Merton's community-led climate action group. We've got people from Friends of the Earth, the Wimbledon Society, and indeed I have trustees from Sustainable Merton and colleagues and volunteers. So, and the John Innes Society. Those are the ones I've been able to identify. So we have a very broad range of people in the room, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've got, if we could move on to the slide that shows the questions that we would like to discuss, which is right back to where I started really, which is about how we as community leaders mobilize residents and businesses to be more energy conscious and save money in the process. And also, what steps can the local authority and national government take to address fuel poverty, which obviously at the moment is a very current and topical issue, and how we can help people in Merton heat their homes more efficiently and move to sustainable energy solutions. Now, before we just start, I'd just like to say a few rules of what I call engagement. So I don't think we should be naming individuals if we're feeling a little frustrated about things. I don't want us to use the session as a council bashing exercise, as I call it. This is about positive partnership and forward strategies, not what has gone out about in the past, that we can deal with that in different ways, I think. And please put your questions or points in the chat, and we will take them in turn, and I will then ask people to respond to them. So on that basis, I think that we can get going. And let's just see if I have any questions there.
There's
So,
a really
sorry.
there's a really interesting question about building new sustainable homes versus existing homes and retrofitting existing homes, from Councillor Jennifer Gould.
Yeah, well, Robin, would you like to respond to that one?
It's easier to build new, right? You know, you can think about these things from the ground up, and you can design them in. But we're not going to demolish, you know, all our housing stock to do that. So I think it's, you know, it's both. I mean, the government wants to build 300,000 new homes a year. You know, you can imagine if all those 300,000 homes built this year didn't have any heating on today, you would save a lot of energy just by doing that. Of course, everybody needs to retrofit. Everybody needs to do what they can to their budgets. And there are lots of simple steps you can do that Anka mentioned in her, you know, in the handbook. And if everybody did that, you know, it's going to help.
Toby, how about from your perspective?
Can you say again? The line broke up. I didn't hear the question.
So is it more cost effective to build new than retrofit an existing property?
Well, I mean, we have to do both, don't we? I think it's probably the answer. I think it's 85 or 90% of our housing stock is going to be the same housing stock in 2050 as it is today. So it really is a case of doing both. And one is very hard. You know, insulating old Victorian houses is not an easy thing to do, but it's something that needs to be done. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And we have another one here from Mary Triguna about how we encourage residents to take draft proofing and energy beneficial measures when those come with costs up front, which may be actually a barrier to people doing them. So Toby, have you got a view on that?
Yes, I mean, if people are struggling to afford those measures, I'd suggest coming along to some of our energy cafes. We have some funding for the next 2 years from the Redress Fund, and we're working with Homes and Habitat on this project. And phase one will be come to a cafe. We will help you with some energy advice. Obviously, switching is not an option at the moment, but it will become an option again someday. But we're also assessing people whether they're suitable for a home visit. And if you get a home visit, I think there's something like around about £60 worth of interventions that can be offered for free as part of that. So that could be draft excluders, flashbacks, LED light bulbs. And while people are there, they're also assessing you whether you're suitable for things like eco funding, warmer homes fund. So it gets you into a process. And obviously things like eco can be up to sort of £4,000 or £5,000 of new windows, new doors, a new heating system, whatever it might be. So I'd look out for those. I mean, some of these measures are relatively inexpensive, I'd say as well. You know, draft excluders you can pick up for sort of £10-15, so it's not really expensive. Things like if you're not using your fireplaces anymore, something like a chimney sheet, they cost around about £30, but you can lose 5% of your heat up your chimney. So small measures like that will make a huge difference. LED lighting, particularly if it's just a screw-in bulb, what we call a golf ball bulb. You know, these things, if you buy them from the wholesalers rather than from your supermarket or from B&Q, they're only £2-3 each. You'll probably get your money back within a year. So, you know, they're relatively small investments. So I'd look at all those small things first and then look at the other things there afterwards. You know, things like solar PV and heat pumps. Yes, they're much more expensive interventions. And there's mid interventions, things like smart heating controls or smart thermostats, which are probably in the hundreds of pounds. So you know, you can gradually work your way up here, but there is help on hand. So come along to our cafes, look on our website, and you'll see when we've got some cafes coming up. And you could get referred for a home visit if you need that home intervention.
Yes, thank you, Toby. And I think, is this not a case of influencing people's behaviour, so that rather than them paying their bill, they actually are making cost savings that thereby reduce their bill? And just going to either Rachel or Anka, because obviously this is what we are demonstrating on Saturday at the pop-up energy event. And I think you've just bought some panels, haven't you? How much did they cost?
I think it's a pack of 5 for about radiator reflector panels for about £20.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, and organizations like Thinking Works, Crew, and Warm and Well Merton will all provide, you know, people advice, like Toby just said. Yeah, just getting people access to that advice where they can actually get many of these resources for free.
Lovely, thank you. Now, someone here has made a point. They're an iPad, so I don't know who they are. But there should be some incentives like nil rate ban VAT for refurbishing existing Victorian windows rather than replacement. So again, Robin, you know about windows, you must have bought a few. What's your view on that?
I mean, so I think green technology, heat pump and stuff, is 5% VAT rated, so there is a tax break on it. Refurbishing windows, you know, you're just paying your general builder, but you would need to do other things. I think just going back to your previous point though about getting people not wanting to spend money on it, you know, there are people that can afford to do a lot of these things, but I think it's getting their mindset to want to do it. And I think it's not just about saving money, it improves your quality of life. Your home is a nicer place to live, and you know, when you wake up and you haven't got your heating on, or you haven't got a draft, or you don't get the cold spots, you don't wake up cold in the night. All those things will add up to just a better quality of life. And you know, they are worth, you know, once you've lived through them, you realize they are worth spending the money on, not just from the cost saving perspective, but from a personal perspective. And I think that is really important.
Yeah, I think that's right. You never want to go back, do you? Once you've got to a level of comfort, going back to those days of shivering during the night and things. So Giles Reed has put on the in the chat the link to the Merton Council link, where there's some tips there as well. And then we have a question for Robin from Kath Maria. How much did you spend on building that house, Robin? On all our minds, I'm sure.
So I think the cost, it's going to depend on lots of things. You know, how much does your kitchen cost? How much do your tiles cost? There are many different variables involved in it, but I'll give you some numbers. So the SIPS frame itself, the structure, cost about 32,000. A wildflower roof will cost about £5,000. The solar panels cost me about 9. When I put the ventilation, the heating system in, that cost me about 30. So I think I would say to make it eco, over and above the non-eco, probably cost me an additional £60,000 to £70,000, because even if you're buying a £5,000 green roof, you've got to have a thicker roof membrane, you've got to have a stronger roof. You know, when that roof is wet, it weighs 14 tons. So there are the car charge, everything adds up to a lot. I mean, you could do it for cheaper than we did it, I'm sure, but all those things, I mean, a heat pump, just to buy a heat pump is probably £5,000, and to get it installed, retrofitted into a house will probably cost you 10 to 15,000. Yeah, hopefully that gives you enough.
Yeah, no, it does. And you know, I think the cost of building, actually, I think that sounds not huge, because obviously it's the cost of land. When we buy property, it's the land that's the cost rather than the build cost, isn't it? So anyway, Katie is suggesting, would you consider doing open house, which I think is a lovely idea, Robin. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
If I, I'm more than, if people, I've had, I don't know, we had, there was an article about us in the Times, and we were on the actual front page of a little picture of me on the front page of the Times, on the front cover of their sort of homes section. And off the back of that, and quite a number of people have contacted me, and actually people sort of, what Toby was mentioning before about corporates wanting to help, actually some corporates have contacted me because I sort of say that I want to build more eco homes, and they said people have contacted me saying, how can they help me? And lots of people have contacted me generally, and I'm more than happy if people are interested in eco homes, interested in this sort of thing, more than happy to show people around and talk people through it, because I probably, like everybody on here, believe that it's, there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to know, and the simple things that can inspire you and help you to change, for the better. So I'm more than, I would happily do, show whoever wanted to see it around.
I think inspirational is the right word there. And obviously, if you are part of the open house movement, I don't know what, anyway, I know open house happens, doesn't it, every September, I think, then that's brilliant. Now, I think Tom's put in a question. I would like to now move on to the bigger discussion, which is about how, what steps can we take to address this way that we have to heat our homes more efficiently, and particularly with the retrofitting debate. So Tom has put that, it's obvious that the government needs a government-backed environmental loan fund to allow people to borrow, and that actually is one of our asks in our campaign, is certainly loans or incentives to stimulate the market, because it's such a massive task, and the government, I think, is talking about demand driving supply, but actually, if you look at it from the climate change perspective, actually you want supply to drive demand, because if it's accessible, easy to do and affordable, then people will probably do it. At the moment, finding out about all this stuff is an absolute minefield, and yeah, it's complicated, and I know there are people in the audience that have done that. So what's people's views in terms of information and advice and government-backed loans on this? That would be very interesting to hear. Now, someone else has asked about, so I'll leave that point with you, and please come back on that, either through the chat, or you could raise your hand if you would like to speak. So someone has asked about...
Councillor Irons had her hand raised.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to.
That's all right.
I backed out then, and then yeah. Thank you for spotting me. It was just a thing of a thought around the thing of government incentives and leadership, and I obviously as a local councillor, and the frustrations we all feel. This is not a political party issue. This is taking us all down. We're all going down the same path. We all need to come together to kind of across the political divide to find solutions to this. So I don't mean to sound political when I say this, but we do need a proper national strategy around insulation, because a heat pump is useless without insulation. But how we make that affordable and accessible is another thing. But I do think the government misses a trick by not using local councils more, because if you notice through the COVID kind of funds and delivery, it was local councils that made that happen and made that work. When when things started actually coming together, it was the local councils that were at the forefront of that, and we're the ones who deliver all these initiatives. So I would like government to lean on local councils more to deliver this, and to do it on a local level, ward by ward, street by street, but to do that we need the funding, and we need the kind of the freedom to do that, but I don't think we've got that yet.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. And it is interesting, isn't it, whether one believes in top-down delivery or bottom-up delivery. No one knows an area like the people that live in it or work in it, or in your case is responsible for it. Toby, do you have a view on that? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got kind of strong views on those kind of things, but yeah, I think it's frustrating. I think sort of on a national level, I agree with Councillor Irons on what she's just said. You know, if we're going to have a fabric policy, it's got to be from central government, and paybacks on things like insulation can be 30, 40, 50 years. Very few of us live in one house for 30, 40, 50 years to make that investment. So it's really, really tough when you're looking at retrofit. I think it really is. So just picking up on something she said about heat pumps, though, it depends on the fabric of the building. So you can make heat pumps work. It's just they'll have to run longer and lower. But if the incentives are right, as in if we were moving government policy from having climate change levy on electricity, moving that across the gas, then those incentives would work. So if we moved the 0.8 pence across, then you would find heat pumps would be around £350 a year cheaper than running your gas boiler. At the moment, the incentives are the wrong way around. So there's a whole lot that needs to be done on a government level. I think it's stuff that could be done on the council level in terms of things like planning as well. So there's a whole raft of measures I think need to be addressed on both national and local level to make this stuff work.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. And my personal view is we do need at national level some almost like government information adverts that tell people in simple language what a heat pump is and what difference it will make to your home. Because at the moment, there's an awful lot of negative press around the noise that you know, they create and all of this sort of stuff, and where would it go if I live in a flat and things like that. So personally, I think you've got to have the communication at national level, and that's the leadership, and then at a local level you can have the implementation of it, because that's about the locality. Toby, did you want to come back in?
Well, just on that one piece about the noise of them, you know, so they make exactly the same noise as a gas boiler. The difference being they're outside your house rather than inside. Yeah. So they're around about 55 decibels. There are smaller heat pumps that are even quieter. You can have split systems that would be pretty much whisper quiet within 2 meters, 2 meters away from these things. So there are a lot of misconceptions, and one of them being, you know, you've got to sort out all of your insulation before you can install a heat pump. Not necessarily. I think if you're a C or above property, your heat pump will run just fine. And if the incentives were there, then probably a D and above running costs wouldn't be too, you know, wouldn't be any worse than your current gas boiler. So I think there's a lot of myth busting to be done.
Yeah, thank you. And Tom, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Diana. Thanks for today. It's been really edifying. I don't think we're going to make major progress until we accept that we've got over 20 million properties to be dealt with, plus all the offices, schools, colleges, and so on. We can't get away from it. There has to be a central strategy that involves a serious amount of money that people can borrow from. That money doesn't have to be grants. Grants only last for one person, but a loan can get used again and again once it's repaid. And I see Toby's point about the length of the loan needed, but if you move house in that period, you simply pay back the outstanding loan from sale of the property, so that the money goes back into the system to help your neighbour and so on.
Yeah. So that's really in favour of incentivisation then, in whatever way, Tom.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. But also, Diana, the key here is that so many problems get solved in one fell swoop, because we would end up being able to give a lot of young men and women meaningful employment for a really long period of their lives, solving, you know, a major headache for the government in terms of employment. And the amount of energy we buy in from abroad comes to about 100 billion quid a year. Well, all the energy we can generate locally offsets the need for buying oil from, you know, wherever, and so keeps that money circulating in the local economy.
Yeah, yeah. Interestingly, I've just come from a meeting where we were discussing about green jobs. the South London Partnership, which is backed by Merton Council, has just issued a report about green jobs and a huge opportunity for London, and I think particularly this area, and it's an area I think we should be talking about in the future, but here today we are concentrating around energy really. And there is a question here from Zoe in the audience saying about Sustainable Merton and the Council climate action groups and how closely linked are the two. And I think that's a really important question. And Councillor Martin Welton is in the audience and may want to respond to that. From my perspective, representing Sustainable Merton, I am also the community co-chair for the Green Economy group of the Climate Action Group. And I think as well, we have the chair in the audience as well, who may want to say something. So it's all about partnership from my perspective. We have to work together. Merton is not a big borough, and the joint combination of us working together will have much bigger impact than us all doing separate things. So that's the way I like to approach things and how I do approach things. So that's my response to that. Yes, there's Councillor Welton. Welcome, Martin. Would you like to say something?
Thank you. And can I just firstly thank you, Diana, for this this session. It's been incredibly helpful and useful, especially the work that Sustainable Merton has been undertaking. In terms of that question, we are working obviously very closely with a wide range of organisations. Diana is one of our leads. And that's essential going forward because collectively it expands beyond Merton Council, and residents and businesses have a key role to play in terms of the borough, and we all need to work together collectively moving forward, but having that spirit of partnership. We've achieved a great deal in the last year, but we're well aware and very conscious that there is a lot more to do. And what will be key to that is the level of funding, especially when we think about issues like heat pumps and getting homes to be carbon neutral as well. So a lot of challenges out there, but that work is essential.
Good, thank you. Right, anyone else want to say anything around that, or any other points?
Just in relation to kind of Robin's story, and I put this in the chat, I think it's so important to be sharing more stories like Robin's, but also from people who maybe just installed a radiator or reflector panel, or, you know, made smaller changes, because, you know, the behavior change research has shown that when people see others who they identify with, who look like them, making these changes, they're more likely to make them too. More so than if they're told by the council or an organization to make them. If they can see their neighbor doing it, I think that's probably going to be really quite effective. So yes, share stories.
Yeah, and I think always, Rachel, as you say, it is about influencing. We all influence others, don't we, through our words and our actions. So I think those micro level stories are equally as important as seeing Robin's fabulous home and what can be done with a lot of effort and energy, and obviously the money to do it as well. Okay, any other points, any other questions? No? If not, we will start to wrap up. Just say, I know there's been a few questions. We will share the slides with you. We have a number of actions that we will take forward. The recording can also be shared, I think, unless my colleagues tell me otherwise, but it has been recorded. Really, just to wrap up with a few words from me and my team here at Sustainable Merton. We've seen Rachel and Ellie, but also Amy is behind the scenes making all this happen, and I do have a number of the trustees and obviously Tom Walsh as our founder in the audience. But from me, my perspective on this is I did a speech at a church event actually not that long ago, and there was a young lady there who was one of the team that were doing the walk from the G12 conference in Cornwall up to Glasgow. And she said this, and I think it really describes it well. We are all in this together, and we might be in the same storm, but not everyone is in the same boat. And I think that is so true. Actions speak louder than words. And here in Merton, there are actions we can all take individually and as organisations and influencers and community leaders that influence others to follow. It is very evident that people need information and advice in order to take those actions. And I think the speakers today have really demonstrated that wonderfully. So thank you to them for sharing their stories with us and speaking with us. And that's it really. We will continue the conversation. We look forward to working together in Merton to meet the net zero climate change targets. I am sure if we take action, it can be done with some good leadership as well. And we as Sustainable Merton will look forward to working with all of you to do that. So thank you for today. Thank you to all our speakers, and we will see you again all very soon. Thank you very much.